Okay, so we are officially recording now. So hopefully this will all work. If the audio gets a little wonky on you guys, somebody please put something in chat and let me know, and we can stop the sharing and just go just kind of go slide by slide, and I'll just record voice. Okay. So I want to reiterate a couple of things that we did yesterday at the very kind of end of class. Okay. You guys remember we were talking about the fact that health and fitness exist on these continuums, right? And we talked about this idea that health has multiple dimensions to it, that it is this idea of not just physical well-being, but also mental and emotional and spiritual well-being. Okay, we are going to spend a lot of our class focusing mostly on physical well-being and just a little bit on kind of mental well-being, and we will leave some of the other sides of those things off for other classes. Okay, I also told you guys that anything that pushes us towards negative health is called a morbidity or a comorbidity. Okay, so comorbidities, and the ones that we're going to focus on in class, typically fall into this category of what we call a chronic disease. Okay, they occur and they persist over a long period of time. These are the things, all right, that are the most common causes of death in adults, all right, in folks that are basically older than y'all, in adults in the world. Okay, about 60% of deaths worldwide, and it's a larger percentage than that in adults, are going to be the result of some type of chronic disease. Okay, what we would call the prevalence, or the number of people that have a chronic disease or that have this morbidity, is on the rise worldwide. Weirdly enough, one of the consequences of Western society, okay, of office work and cars and things like that, is chronic diseases. Just very odd kind of things, that we have technology and we have some things that we would think would be good for life, and in many ways they are, but they have also led to or contributed to the rise of some of these chronic diseases. Okay, so as different countries gain in wealth and become sort of more and more first world type countries, then the prevalence of chronic diseases in those countries is going to go up. I'm going to show you guys some scary data about all of that. We'll see the prevalence of some things just in Oklahoma, kind of in comparison to the rest of the country here in the next few slides as well. I'm doing all of this, okay? I try to tell you guys why I'm going to teach you what I'm going to teach you. I'm doing this because these chronic diseases, okay, are going to kill 6 out of every 10 people that you know, if not more than that. Okay, many of these diseases are going to affect people that you know, and they are affecting people that you know and that you care about right now. And so because of that, okay, you need to know about these things, you need to understand them, you need to understand how we can potentially treat and take care of these things by using exercise and physical activity and diet and those kinds of things. Okay, so if we look at this graph, is showing us the most common chronic diseases in the United States. Okay, and so what you can see here on the y-axis is the percentage of the population, and this is the adult population, typically over 25 years of age, that have a certain condition. Okay, and then you can kind of see as this declines over as we move to the right over here. Okay, the most common type of chronic disease is high blood pressure. Okay, almost 60% of adults, okay, have high blood pressure. And a lot of people have, it's just mildly high blood pressure, okay? We're going to see then Alzheimer's and other diseases of dementia, heart disease, okay? About a third of all people at some point in their life will have depression. Arthritis is very, very common. Diabetes is becoming more and more common. So you guys don't have to know, Okay, you don't have to know specifically the percentages of people that have each one of these. This is just to illustrate that they're very, very common, okay, and they're going to affect a lot of different people. Some of them are much more common than others, especially things associated with cardiovascular disease. Okay, okay. So something related to chronic diseases that we need to pay attention to, because it's going to be really important in understanding the interaction between physical fitness and health, is something called mortality rate. Mortality rate is just the percentage of people in a particular population, okay, that are going to die from something in a given period of time. Okay, so when we talk of mortality rates, and we talk about how fitness contributes to mortality or prevents mortality rates, we usually talk about two things. Okay, the first of those is something that we call all-cause mortality. All-cause mortality is dying from anything. Okay, this is at its essence, I mean, in theory, right, as far as we know, we are all going to die. I know that's very morbid, but we are all going to die at some point from something. Okay, hopefully that is well on somewhere out into the future. Okay, so but if we look at mortality rate, what we would say then is over, let's just say, the calendar year that was 2019, the all-cause mortality rate for all adults in the United States was 2% or something. What that would mean is that 2% of all adults died. Okay, it makes no distinction as to whether or not their death was accidental, their death was from a heart attack or cancer. It makes no distinctions between those kinds of things. Okay, we can also calculate mortality rates, and this may make a little more sense to you guys, from a specific condition. Okay, and this is really important for things right now as we are talking about like COVID. Okay, so we could look at, say, on the screen it says what is the diabetes mortality rate. This would be, take all of the people that have diabetes, and in 2019, how many people that had diabetes actually died. Okay, so typically condition-specific mortality rates are going to be higher than all-cause mortality rates. Okay, and so when we get into this in the next few slides and into the kind of the next set of PowerPoints, we're going to talk very specifically about what are the effects of different kinds of exercise, what are the effects of physical activity, how much you guys move around, on both all-cause mortality rate and on some condition-specific mortality rates. Okay, and so what you guys will see then is that we're going to have more or greater effects on some very condition-specific kinds of mortality rates. Okay, so everybody with me on that? So far, so good. Okay, I'm not going to make you guys calculate these things. This is HES. It's not math class. Okay, but that's kind of where we are. Just a very simple kind of thing here in this next graph. This is just going to show you guys, on the left in men and on the right in women, the pie represents, the whole circle represents all death. Okay, and then each little slice of that is the percentage of all-cause mortality that can be attributed to a very particular condition. Okay, and so what you can see in both men and women is that heart disease is the leading cause of death in adults. Okay, the numbers are slightly different between men and women, and then cancer tends to be number 2. Okay, so if you guys look at all of this, about 50% of all deaths in the US, and these are old data from 2010. If you go to the Center for Disease Control, if you go to the CDC webpage, you can get all kinds of graphs and things like this. The numbers are slightly different, but the distribution hasn't changed. If we had last year's data, about 50% of all deaths are caused by heart disease and cancer. Okay, so 5 out of every 10 people that you know will die from heart disease and cancer. Okay, Then we can kind of move our way down. In men, the third leading cause of death is unintentional injuries. We can talk about why it is that men get in more car accidents or motorcycle accidents, or I don't know, like fall off of cliffs and various things. A lot of adult unintentional injuries come from accidents and things. Um, but we're going to go through some of these things when we get into the later half of class, and we're going to talk about, okay, here's what the leading causes of death are. Here's how exercise and fitness and physical activity can have some positive outcomes on all of this. Okay. If we look at all of this, if we look at now in the next slide here, if we look at things by age, okay, in the top left, we have people aged from 1 year old up to 24. So for most of you guys, y'all are going to fall into this category. Then we have 25 to 44. So I'm barely fitting into that age group. Then we've got 45 to 64 and 65 and older. Okay. But look at the way the colors are distributed. Okay. In people that are 24 and younger, what you note is that cardiovascular disease and cancer are not anywhere close to being the leading causes of death. Okay. We see that it's unintentional injuries, homicide, suicide, okay, in folks that are going to fall in y'all and younger folks' age ranges. When you get into my age group, kind of early-ish adulthood, we still see that unintentional injuries are the leading, but then here come cancer and cardiovascular disease. And then once you get to be over 45, so probably, I'm going to knock on wood, probably most of y'all's parents, and things in that age group, and then over 65 into my parents and maybe your grandparents' age, that's when cancer and heart disease are going to come. What do you guys think? What does this tell you guys? What can you draw from all of this? Okay, does anything jump out at you about sort of what you take from this when you see that in the really, really young population, we don't have cardiovascular disease and diabetes and cancer and things being our leading causes of death? Why do you guys think that is?
Probably because when you're younger, you're more active in comparison to older population. So physical activity, like we mentioned before, can kind of curb some of that. And then, of course, in the long run, as you get older, physical activity may taper off. And then that's kind of when those comorbidities start to creep in.
Okay, no, that's a very nuanced answer there, Jordan. I appreciate that. You are right about that. You guys are probably about as active right now as you're ever going to be in your life. Although COVID and quarantine-ish type conditions, we actually did a study. My PhD student Jessica did a study. We've got a bunch of data. Some of you guys may have participated where we were looking at people's physical activity, asking them to report their physical activity during quarantine and how it changed. And it at least went down to start with. But yes, physical activity does tend to decline with age. That may play some role. Anything else? Do you guys think y'all have cardiovascular disease? Anybody have high blood pressure and wanna tell us and want to share that with us? Anybody? No? Okay. Why is that? You guys are probably right. Probably nobody has high blood pressure. You guys probably don't have cardiovascular disease. Why am I at an increased risk? Maybe I'm less active, but why else? Anybody want to guess?
I mean, younger people usually just running with newer parts.
Running with newer parts, Preston. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, obviously with years and wear and tear and things like that, liken it to a car, I guess. You buy a new car, probably not going to break down unless there's an inherent design flaw. But as the years go on, parts are more likely to just wear as the natural course.
Okay.
Takes its toll.
That's a very apt analogy. I appreciate that. Although I feel mildly attacked that I'm becoming an older car now at this point. But you're not wrong. So what I want to highlight with this, guys, is that chronic diseases are chronic because they last for a very long time. Many of them are very slow to develop, especially cardiovascular disease. Okay, and we'll talk all about that in probably in about 2 weeks from now. Okay, it takes time. It takes time for them to develop. It takes time for things to get bad. Okay, that's both a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because it means, one, we have time to do something about it, but it also means that they kind of build up so slowly that oftentimes people will ignore them. But that's one of the reasons why it's going to take 40 or 45 years, 50 years of life before your cardiovascular system is going to begin to accumulate enough damage or accumulate enough atherosclerosis or something for there to begin to be problems. It's going to take 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 years of life for a mutation in one single cell to evade your immune system and things to be able to form a cancer or something, right? It's just kind of a numbers game that the longer you're here, the more chances there are of these things to kind of begin to happen. So that's kind of what's going on there, okay? So keep some of these things in mind as we talk about this, because if you say that 40% of deaths in adults are from cardiovascular disease, what we mean is, right, that's 40% of adults that are kind of over 45. There's basically no one or almost no one in y'all's age group that occurs. Okay, so let me move this thing back down again. The other bit of this that we're going to spend some time on, and as we're going to start to layer in this idea of activity and fitness and things on top of mortality rates and kind of how they relate to health, that we need to pay attention to is the idea of obesity. Okay, and so what I'm showing you guys now is this is a chart of mortality rates from cardiovascular disease, okay, as it relates to something called the body mass index. Now, the body mass index is your weight divided by your height, in essence. It's height squared, but it is a way for us to try to get some general idea of kind of how much space are you occupying based upon how tall you are. And there's some normative values. We'll talk a whole lot more about all of this when we get into talking about body composition and stuff. I want you all to appreciate that BMI is not a measure of body composition. It doesn't tell us how much body fat or muscle or bone or water or anything else that's in you. It really is just weight as it relates to your height. But what I want you all to look at is we have men in the white line, women in the yellow line, and we have folks that are classified in this idea of what we call normal weight, which is a BMI of 25 and lower. We have overweight, which tends to now be that we've kind of shifted things since this graph was put out, but is 25 to 30, and then obese is anything over 30. But what I want you to know, see how the lines, once you get into the overweight category, and then especially out into the obese category, that your mortality rates from cardiovascular disease are going to increase, okay? So the y-axis on this graph is what we would call a relative risk. And what this means is you would take, and we say normal weight people are going to be our reference group. So let's just say that in a normal weight group of people, you have a 5% chance of dying from cardiovascular disease in any given year. Then we get into, say, the overweight group, and kind of right here at this cut point, it's at about 1.5. So what that means is you're about 1.5 times as likely to die. So you would have about a 7.5% chance of dying from cardiovascular disease if you're there. You get into obese, especially if you're men, it gets all the way out here up near to 3. So you're like 3 times as likely to die from cardiovascular disease in a given year if you have a BMI that is, let's say, over 40 or something like that. We're going to talk about relative risk a decent amount in class. We're going to talk about relative risk as it relates to BMI, and then as it relates to how fit you are, both with muscular strength and aerobic fitness, and then also with physical activity levels. And so this is going to be our way of kind of comparing people that fall into different groups. Okay. All right. So we talked yesterday about what fitness is. So we're not going to spend very much time on this, but I told you all, remember that fitness also has multiple dimensions to it. Much like health, there's multiple dimensions to fitness. And so often we will put these things into 5 very broad categories. One is what we call cardiorespiratory fitness. Think of this as this is your like running or biking endurance component. This is going to be something that's dependent upon how well your heart and your lungs and your muscles can all work together. We have muscular strength, so how strong you are, how much weight can you lift, how many push-ups could you do, okay? And then there's also this idea of what's called local muscular endurance, and this would be like how many times could you take kind of a light-ish weight and how many repetitions could you do with it, okay? Flexibility is considered a component of physical fitness, as is body composition. And so like how much muscle do you have, how much fat do you have, how much bone or bone mineral density, how much body water do you have? These are all going to be things that fall under the category of physical fitness. And so each one of these things is something that can be altered by diet, exercise, okay, different kind of training regimes. And so we're going to get into a little bit later today kind of talking about the role of fitness in determining health. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of run through some of these sorts of things. Not really much else there. The rest of that stuff there is pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so what I'm going to do, guys, because I don't want to just completely bore you guys, is I'm not going to go bullet point by bullet point through every slide. If there are slides that I think are relatively self-explanatory or that are maybe less important but are useful from a reference standpoint, then I'm just going to kind of brush across those, and you guys can go back and look at them at your leisure when you're doing your assignments or you're getting ready to do your take-home test. Okay. All right. So into lecture 2 now. So I love this picture. This was a picture that Dr. Pinku, who teaches some of the other sections of this class with me, that he found. And we sort of say, what's wrong here? And we love it that there's people going up an escalator to go into the fitness center. So I always find that to be a very kind of a very apt explanation of sort of America right there. Okay. So we have had some idea, okay, that exercise and physical activity are important for health for a very, very long time. Okay, you can trace some of this stuff all the way back to the Greeks if you want. So what I have here is a quote from President Kennedy that was published in Sports Illustrated in 1960. It was a thing that he called the soft American, which is maybe more apt today than even it was then. But it says we are under-exercised as a nation. We look at things instead of kind of playing or participating. We ride instead of walking. Our existence deprives us of the minimum of physical activity essential for healthy living. So even if it was not in some ways formalized, people knew and understood that somehow, some way, being active was good for us, good for body, mind, spirit, soul, however you want to encompass all of those things. And that as what we think of today as modern society was coming into being, that we were losing a lot of those things. Okay, we were losing a lot of those things. So what you can see here, okay, these are data from something called the Harvard Alumni Study. And so one of the ways that we know things about the role of fitness and physical activity and obesity and how it's going to interplay with health is from these long-term studies on these very, very large groups of people. And one of the most famous of them is something called the Harvard Alumni Study. And so what we have is, this is a group of people. This was, I believe, begun in the 1950s, and it was initially only men. Ladies, I'm sorry, they didn't let you guys run the marathon in the Olympics, I think, until like the 70s. They were afraid your uterus would fall out. I'm not kidding about that. And so science has, and in some ways continues to be, has historically been unkind, or sort of understudied women. And we're trying to do the best we can to remedy some of that now. But these are data from about 17,000 men that were graduates of Harvard. And every year after they graduated, they would call them on the phone, and they would ask them questions, right? So, like, how active are you? Do you exercise? Do you run? Do you bike? Do you lift weights? And then they would ask them things like, do you have high blood pressure? Or have you had a heart attack? Have you had a stroke? Okay. How tall are you? How much do you weigh? Have you had cancer? And so what they would do from all of this is they would just call them every year, gather this information, and they accumulated this huge data set over about 25 years. And as you can imagine, what happened over the course of these 25 years was some of these men began to die. Some of them would have heart attacks. Some of them would have cancer. Some of them had diabetes and died from those things. And they began to paint a picture then of what is it that was killing them, and was that related in some way to other things that they were doing. Okay. And so what you guys see here, these data were published in 1986. So they are about 35 years old, but these were the first data published showing that people that were more physically active every day lived longer than people that were less physically active. Okay. And so what you guys see in our graph is, along the x-axis on the bottom, this is physical activities in kilocalories per week. So a kilocalorie is just what you guys think of as a calorie. Okay. So these are people that expended, right? If you expended 2,000 calories or more in a week, it cost you about 100 calories to run or walk a mile. Okay, that's kind of an easy reference. It's not exactly 100 calories. And some of you it's a little bit more, and some of us it's a little bit less. But just imagine, these are people that are doing roughly 20 miles of exercise or activity in some way, shape, or form per week. Okay. Our reference group were getting less than 5 miles of all of that per week. So just imagine, those of you that have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, and it keeps track of your steps and it tells you how many you're getting per day. Figure out how many steps you take in a day, your stride length you can measure, and we can calculate how much distance you've covered. Okay, you guys can kind of get at all of this. And what you see basically is that the people that were getting their 20 miles per week were about half as likely, thereabouts, to die, especially in the older age group, about half as likely to die than are folks that were getting less activity. So these are the first day where we thought, oh, look, maybe there is something about getting activity that is good for us. Okay, there's something that is good for us. And so then this is one of those studies that really prompted everyone to start looking into this in a much more detailed way, to try to understand the how and the why, and are some kinds of activity better than others? The answer is yes, right? And then, is it better for some diseases versus other diseases, and other kind of interactions that we need to pay attention to. Okay. Okay. So what I'm showing you guys now is, these are the kind of 4 of the top 10 leading causes of death in the US. Okay. Cardiovascular disease accounts for about 40%, if you accumulate all the different kinds of cardiovascular disease together in adults. Cancer is about 25%, stroke is about 6%, diabetes is about 3%. Again, the numbers are less important than the idea that these are going to account for almost 80% of deaths in most US adults. Okay. What you see on the right is the relative reduction in risk that you get from being physically active, okay? You get a 50% reduction in the risk of dying in any given year from cardiovascular disease if you are physically active. For certain kinds of cancer, it's going to be maybe 20 to 30% reduction in risk. Stroke, similarly, maybe 20 to 50%, diabetes, 25 to 50%, okay? So this is some of the leading causes of death in adults, and every one of these can be positively affected, okay, simply by going out and taking a walk every day, okay? Going out and taking a walk. It can be even more affected if you'll go for a run or maybe a bike ride that's going to be a little bit more vigorous, or if you add in some weights and some of those kinds of things, all right? So very, very, very powerful, okay? This is where the idea of that exercise may be the best medicine comes in, okay? So what we now know from some further study is that kind of moderate to high levels of physical activity, and we'll talk about what moderate to high means in a few minutes, can add somewhere between maybe 1.5 to 3 years to your life, okay? So think of all the people in your life that you care about, okay? If we were in class and we had more time, I would make you write down the 10 people that you care about most in your life. I would then tell you that 4 of those 10 are going to die from cardiovascular disease, 2.5 of them are going to die from cancer, right? And then 1 other one's going to die from stroke or diabetes. It's going to get 8 out of those 10 people. Every one of those people that you care about, if you can get them to go out and walk every day, okay, you get 2 to 3 more years with them in your life. And so that's really, really, really important, especially as you start to get a little bit older, like me, and if potentially you have children of your own, those kinds of things become a little more kind of acutely aware of all of that. So the flip side of this, though, is that we don't do enough activity, okay? As Americans, we do not do enough activity. We are sedentary, we are also obese, and it is killing us, okay? And it is killing us. So the other thing to keep in mind, guys, so if you are physically active, okay, or you are active enough, you're going to get roughly a 50% reduction in dying from anything sort of prematurely any year, okay? So, and part of that is because most of the things that are going to kill you are going to be cardiovascular disease or cancer or stroke or diabetes, okay? So exercise has this very, very, very powerful, okay, effect on these chronic diseases, and it can in some ways prevent you from getting them or be used in some ways as a treatment for these kinds of things, okay? So think of this in this way. Imagine if we could keep you from getting the coronavirus as long as you would go run every day, okay? As long as you would go run every day. How many of you would go run every day? If you knew that you could do that and it would keep you from getting the coronavirus, give me some thumbs up or nods of heads or something. Who would go run every day? I hate running, okay? I do it, but I hate it. Yes, maybe would you go every day? Okay. In y'all's age group or for people that you care about, I don't again want to be morbid, but you are like 14,000 times more likely to die from a heart attack or cardiovascular disease than you probably are from COVID. Although people kind of in my age group and a little bit older, it's much, much higher. Okay, but death rates from cardiovascular disease and things are way, way higher than COVID. And if you will go run every day, then it will, for the most part, keep you from dying. One, it will keep you, if you go and do it now and keep going, it'll probably keep you from getting a lot of cardiovascular disease, and then it will keep you alive longer once you do have it, okay? We know this intuitively, and yet we still won't do it, okay? We still will not do it. Okay. What time is it? It's 11:23. All right. We're doing okay. All right. So, oops, let me back up here. I don't know what's happening with my thing. All right, sorry. So these next set of data are similar data, but we're going to make a distinction in these data. They're showing basically the same thing. It's showing the relative risk of dying from anything on the y-axis, but it is showing the percentages of people, and we have two lines. This top line here talks about physical activity. So the most physically active, you're getting the most activity are on this end. You are the least physically active are on this end. But it also is going to show what we call physical fitness. We need to make a distinction between the effect of physical activity on mortality rates and the effects specifically of physical fitness on mortality rates. So, Whitney, I'm going to ask you, because I can see you here on things. Which one do you think is better? Is it better to be more active, or is it better to be more fit, according to this particular graph?
I would say it's better to be more physically fit than just physically active.
Yes, absolutely correct. Okay. Being physically fit is going to have a larger effect, a more powerful effect on your reducing your risk. So that should raise a question for you guys. Do you think that being physically active contributes to being physically fit? Maddie is nodding her head yes. Maddie, would you care to elaborate? Like how do you think being active contributes to being physically fit?
Well, I think being physically fit is kind of like you go and you regularly exercise and you eat well, so your body's in some of the best like condition it can be in. And to be able to get that where you have to be active, you can't just be physically sit being a couch potato.
Okay. Okay. Do you guys think it's possible to be physically fit without being physically active?
Imagine it's quite difficult.
Quite difficult, Preston? Okay. So there's one other piece of this that I haven't told you guys yet. You guys want to guess at what that is? What other piece of information do we need to be able to really kind of tease out what's happening here? What have we not defined well yet?
Kind of your genetic disposition.
Okay, sure. But your genetic disposition for what, Maddie?
For chronic diseases, like I'm at a higher risk for cardiovascular disease than some other people because of my genetics.
Sure. That's very, very true. Cancer, cardiovascular disease, they have these very kind of common, powerful genetic components, okay? Do you think physical fitness has a genetic component to it?
Yes.
Okay, Jordan says yes, okay. Jordan, we were supposed to check in and see how you were doing with the bench press yesterday. How did it go?
I did not bench press at all because they were all taken. So a lot of just dumbbell work, high rep stuff. So
high rep dumbbell stuff? Okay, we're going to break you of that high rep stuff before class is over, okay?
it was like 12, 15 reps. It wasn't
Okay, that's
super
fine.
high.
That's okay.
Yeah, more on that,
Okay.
I guess, hypertrophy range. So.
Okay, we're going to break you of using that language too. But okay, I know where it comes from. All right, let me ask. I'm gonna call on somebody. We'll see who's actually here. Shelby, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember from yesterday how we defined fitness?
Yes.
Okay. Could you share that with us again? What you remember the definition of fitness to be?
We kind of said some people are more fit to do certain things.
Uh-huh.
Like if you're older, you're not as fit to do a jumping jack or etc. So
Okay. So it's an ability to do something, right? That's
Yeah.
what fitness is. So on the graph that I've shown you guys, we are looking at, it's calling it physical fitness. How do we measure that? What measure, if you were to come to my lab and we were going to measure your physical fitness, because we want to know where you fall on that range so we can give you some idea of relative to other people, how likely you are to die from cardiovascular disease or something else. What do you think I should measure? It doesn't have to just be Shelby, it can be anybody. What would we measure? What are they getting at with that thing? Should I measure how high you can jump? Should I measure, I don't know, how much weight you can squat, or like how fast you can run a mile? Like, what should I measure?
I think, well, when you talk about fitness, I think the slide that showed like endurance, your car, like would you test like each of those categories for that person, and then like see where they fall like on a spectrum for like that age and gender or whatever the standards are?
We absolutely would, or we could. We can measure where there are normative values for flexibility, for body composition, for muscular strength, in particular relative to body weight, and for aerobic endurance. Okay, so you guys could watch. If we were in class, it's a more spectacular demonstration when I do it in class. I may be the least flexible person that you've ever seen. I won't try if I can like barely kind of, oh, I'm getting a cramp in my hip flexors. Okay. So I'm not very flexible. So my question is, that means I have low physical fitness from a flexibility standpoint. Is that going to kill me? Is that going to predispose me to being more susceptible to cardiovascular disease or to cancer? The weird answer is yes. Is that it does. It's not exactly kind of a one-to-one link, but people that are less flexible tend to not live as long, which my wife continues to yell at me about, because she did gymnastics and was a dancer until she was kind of a mid-teenager and those kinds of things, and so she even now can like put her nose like down on her knees and things, and is super flexible, and she makes fun of me a lot. But this level of physical fitness, what is in this graph, okay, what you guys are going to do in labs, we're going to measure different kinds of fitness and different kinds of physical fitness. Excuse me. In lab, we're going to measure muscular fitness, or we're going to have you guys estimate your muscular fitness. In the graph that is here, though, this is showing what we would call cardiorespiratory fitness. So of the things that are the most powerfully protective against cardiovascular disease and the like, is going to be something, a variable that we call your VO2 max, VO2. This stands for the volume of oxygen that can be brought in from the atmosphere through your lungs, gotten into your bloodstream, okay, and then taken out to your muscles to be used in the mitochondria to make ATP. So think of this in the most basic sense as these are the people that can run a mile the fastest, okay? It's this endurance capacity, it's this ability of your heart and your lungs and your muscles to all work in concert. The higher that value is, the more fit you are in that particular way, the longer you're going to live, okay? That's why running is so good for us, even though it sucks, okay? That's why cycling, kind of at a pretty intense thing, is good for us. Walking is good, okay? Walking is better than not walking and not being active, but running is even better than walking, and that's kind of the idea behind all of this, okay? All right, so let me move on to our next slide. So what we also have to layer on top of this, and it's partially going to be caused by our lack of physical activity, is this idea of obesity, okay? So as of right now, about 70% of adults, okay, 70% of adults in the US are either overweight or obese by their BMI. So that means they have a BMI of 25 or higher. 70% of us. Now, if you're kind of right at the idea, right at around 25, people that BMI is not great for people that have a lot of muscle and those kinds of things, but in general, it's not too bad. Okay? About almost 40% of people are obese by BMI. Okay, this means they likely have excess body fat. What this graph is showing is in several year bins, what you can see is the prevalence of being obese. This is in adults aged 20 to 74. And so we are projecting that in another 10 years or so, half of all Americans may be obese by BMI. Okay? As you guys will see, we combine these two things. If we combine being obese with also not being active or fit enough, and that's the primary driver of a lot of these chronic diseases. Okay? So I can tell you all that we are much less active than we used to be. My question for you guys is why? Why are we not as active as we used to be? Why are we more obese? I'm gonna just try to randomly, we'll pick somebody else. Tyler, if you're there,
Yep,
why do you
okay.
think why are we more obese now than we used to be?
I don't know if this is the whole reason, but a lot of our jobs now are not physical labor. A lot of them require like sitting behind a desk in an office or, game development or something like that.
Sitting on your couch talking to people via Zoom like I'm doing right now.
Yep.
Yeah, not a particularly active thing, right?
Correct.
I guess I could get on the treadmill and try to teach you guys while I was walking, but that might end very badly for all of us. Okay, so our jobs have changed, right? Let's just imagine all of this. It is the year 1900, okay? What do you guys think the most common job is in 1900? So,
Farmer.
farmer, okay? Anybody ever been to a farm? Anybody ever had to work on a farm? I know from reading some of y'all's little information sheets, some of you have some of this in your family, right? So my mom grew up on a dairy farm in Kansas. And so she likes to tell all these crazy stories of being like 7 years old and having to drive the truck out to go like herd the cows and throwing hay bales and all of this stuff when she would, basically call me soft. But farming is really, really hard work, right? It's a lot of physical labor. You move around a bunch, you lift things. It is not for the faint. Okay. What is the most common kind of job now? Probably some sort of sit behind a computer office-ish kind of job. Okay. How do we get around? What was maybe the most common way that people got around in 1900? How did you get from one place to the next?
You walk.
Okay, Madison says we might walk. Sure. Or maybe you rode a horse or something. There weren't any cars. There weren't any Lime scooters or anything else. You couldn't just pull up and call an Uber on your phone to get you from one place to the next. Jobs required activity and kind of manual or physical labor. If you worked a manufacturing job, you were doing those kinds of things. Okay. A lot of transportation was on walking or biking or things of that nature. Okay. We don't do much of that now. We have set up society so that a lot of that stuff has been taken out of our jobs. It's been taken out of our way and our ability to get around. Okay. What's the other piece of this? Why else might we be obese?
There are a lot of fast food chains now.
A lot of fast food chains. Okay. I have not had fast food since the middle of March, and I swear to God, it's good for my waistline, but it's killing me. I want a Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich so bad, and my wife will not let us go. She's like, "Is it worth possibly getting sick and dying all for some chicken nuggets?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I could use a milkshake." We get takeout from some local places and like get it and wipe it off with Clorox wipes and spray it with Lysol and a bunch of things, even though now the CDC says we're very unlikely to get things. So maybe I'll get some Chick-fil-A soon. Okay, yes, I can do that, right? If I want food, I can just Postmate some food to my house, okay? How do we fix food? What makes fast food different or unique? Or I assume, Madison, you were implying that fast food might be bad for us, that fast food is in some way, shape, or form contributing to us being obese. And I'm not going to disagree with you, but my question is why? Why is that?
It's heavily processed and most of it's frozen to begin with.
It's heavily processed and frozen. Okay. So I should have warned you guys about this yesterday. I think it was on one of the slides. you all will say things, and my favorite thing to do is to just ask you questions, and my favorite question is tell me why. What does it mean that food is processed? Why is that a bad thing? Which again you're intimating, but what does it mean that food is processed?
It means that most of the nutrients that was originally there is taken out to keep it lasting longer.
To keep it lasting longer? Are you sure? If I take nutrients out of things, and is the caloric content going to go down, and isn't fast food really have a whole lot of calories in it?
I think a lot of fast food has a lot of additives and
A lot of
like
additives. Oh, it certainly has additives. That's for
like
sure. Madison's not wrong in some ways, and I will press you guys on these things, and I don't want you guys. I really appreciate you guys participating. I'm going to try to challenge some of your assumptions on things, mostly because people will say things like, "Oh, I don't want to eat processed food." I'm like, well, what does that mean, right? What is processed food, right? Like my wife does this with our daughter, and my wife has a degree in history. And I'm like, what do you know about nutrition? I'm like, you read something on Pinterest on the mommy blog that said to do this and this. And I'm like, are you sure that that's bad for her? Like she eats, like, I don't eat vegetables. I'm not flexible. I don't eat vegetables. My favorite food is cheese dip and nacho cheese Doritos. I have pretty reasonable genes, but I'm just hopeful that I can exercise enough to outrun my terrible diet. And those kinds of things. So, okay, so I'm sorry, my rant will be over now. There are lots of additives in food to keep them preserved, right? There are preservatives that are going to be in there. Processing food means that, we're adding some things in, we're taking some things away. That's right. Sometimes when you cook things, it's processing it in that way. Like you're not just going out to the field and picking an apple off of the tree and then eating your apple, okay? Although I would argue that some things that we do as part of what we would call quote unquote processing is not in and of itself bad for us. It's just the fact that I go to McDonald's and I get a giant, right, like a giant gallon of Coke, right? I drink my body weight in Coke every day, and I can get a supersized fry, and we fried it and everything. So that's the other big kind of thing, right? Is that we have lots of foods that are very calorically dense. Okay. So one of the reasons that we tend to be obese is we eat more calories in a given day than we need. Many of you guys will learn. Yeah, I've got a lot of questions about all of this. We'll talk about it probably next week. I am very much a calories in, calories out from a diet and weight control kind of person. There's lots of evidence for this. If you eat fewer calories than you need in a day, you will lose weight. Doesn't matter if those calories are all coming from Twinkies, which we all know will survive like nuclear winter or something. Or if you're overeating, but all you're eating is, I don't know, salad and boiled chicken and kale and I don't know, pick whatever you think is the healthiest food possible. If you eat too much of it, you can and you will actually gain weight in those ways. So we eat too much, we don't exercise, we don't get enough activity, and therefore it makes us obese and it makes us sedentary. And both of those things are contributing to why we have a lot of these chronic diseases. Okay, so that's my pitch, guys. That's my pitch. Exercise, be physically active, do as much as you can. Okay, we've been going for about an hour. We will take a 5-minute break. Okay, I am going to figure out now how to pause recording, resume recording, and off we go again. Okay, so one of the things that we also need to be kind of aware of is that there are people that are obese and then there are people that are obese, which is just kind of, we need to make some distinctions between that. Not all people that are obese are the same, okay? So typically what this means is there are people that are obese but are going to have reasonably good cardiovascular function and reasonably good metabolic function, i.e. they're not going to have type 2 diabetes. And simply being obese is not great from a health standpoint, but if you are obese and you continue to be active and pretty reasonably fit in the midst of all of that, then you can keep a lot of those things from some of the other bad consequences from happening. So we just need to be aware of that fact. And originally, in a lot of older studies, we did not make any distinctions between those two things. And so this is this newer idea that has come to us that simply being obese is not necessarily as bad as we originally thought that it was. So you have to kind of have some other things that go on. And we will get into all of that as we get more into some of our chronic disease kinds of things, okay? What I mean from all of this, and this is really, really, really kind of noted by the data that I'm showing you here, okay, is that we have evidence that being obese, but being very active and being very fit, essentially you have the same all-cause mortality rate as a person that is normal weight or underweight, but that is also fit, okay? So what that tells us, and the big take home from that is going to be that in these data, the pink bars are people that are not very fit, so they do not have good cardiorespiratory function. The yellow bars are people that are fit, and then down here, each of our groups are going to be grouped out by waist circumference. So you have a larger waist circumference, you have a smaller waist circumference, and in theory, this is going to give us some general idea of obesity. People that are obese tend to have larger waist circumferences. What I want you to look at in this, though, is that our people that are fit but are in theory obese by waist circumference have relatively similar risk of dying from anything as our sort of moderate and low waist circumference group. And they're better off than the unfit people in both the kind of the smaller waist circumference groups. So we can kind of break this down by saying that it is preferable from a health standpoint to be obese but fit than it is to be normal weight or what people might think of as skinny or something, but unfit. So in many, many ways, physical activity and physical fitness trumps obesity when it comes to your risk of getting and dying from cardiovascular disease or cancer or diabetes or something like that, okay? So this should also provide us some hope that in some ways it doesn't matter whether or not you are obese. Go out and walk. Go out and walk the dog, go for a jog, ride a bike, lift some weights, go do something. It's still going to be really, really good for you, whether you care about losing weight or not, okay? Getting out and just simply being active regardless of how much body fat you have is going to have some very, very positive benefits, okay? Okay. Trying to look my way through all of this. This is just kind of showing, this is just the percentage of people, and it's just showing that the percentage of people that are obese is dramatically increasing over time. Okay, so the last little bit of things we're going to try to get through today is let's talk a little bit more about physical activity, if we can, okay? And another important distinction is the difference between physical activity and specifically exercise, okay? So exercise is a certain type of physical activity. When you do exercise, we consider exercise to be physical activity that is planned, that is in theory structured, okay? And it is done to either maintain or improve one of the dimensions of physical fitness, okay? So you're going to go out and go run today. The hope is that you've made a plan. You are purposefully going to do this in an effort to maintain or improve your cardiorespiratory fitness or something like that. You're going to go to yoga class because you want to maintain or improve your flexibility in your cardiorespiratory endurance. Okay, that's exercise. Physical activity, on the other hand, is a much broader term. There are lots of things that fall under physical activity, and I'm going to illustrate that by what I asked you guys to do tomorrow, okay, or what you're going to do for me this evening and bring to class tomorrow. Physical activity is any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscle, okay? So if I take my Gatorade Zero here and I pick it up and I take a drink, I have just engaged in physical activity. okay? It's a bodily movement. I'm moving my arm, okay? A bodily movement produced by skeletal muscle. All movement is produced by skeletal muscle, and it results in a substantial increase in energy expenditure above resting levels, okay? So this brings up a couple of ideas that we need to explore a little bit deeper in order to more fully grasp what physical activity really is, okay? So we have this concept of muscles and movement, and we have this concept of energy expenditure, okay? As you guys sit there doing nothing, okay, your body is burning a certain amount of calories. The vast majority of caloric expenditure that your body undergoes is performed in the muscles, okay? Your heart is a muscle. Every time it beats, it's using energy, okay? Now we see Whitney's dog there potentially. So when you think of resting energy expenditure, I want you to think of this is how much energy your body has to burn to keep your heart beating, your lungs functioning so that your diaphragm can contract so you can breathe, and that your brain can function, okay? A general idea of resting energy expenditure is how much caloric expenditure you have per minute or per hour while you're sleeping, okay? While you're sleeping. So this is something that we can measure in almost any one of our exercise physiology labs. You could come to my lab if we were able to do that. Right now, we could hook you up to a machine. We would turn the lights off and essentially ask you to take a nap for an hour. You just lay there for an hour. Lights off, you can go to sleep, that'd be perfect. And we would measure then, as your body kind of comes down to its absolute baseline, how much energy do you need? Okay. Resting energy expenditure is going to help us understand kind of how we grade physical activity. Things like walking are going to have a little bit above, they're going to be a little bit above resting energy expenditure. Running is going to be even farther above. Running really fast is going to be farther still. Resting energy expenditure also helps us identify what your daily caloric needs are going to be. How many calories do you need to eat every day in order to stay kind of right at a caloric balance, assuming you didn't do anything else, okay? So anything that we do that requires movements, okay? So if I started doing jumping jacks right now, that would make my muscles contract. My muscles are going to need energy to be able to contract. That's going to raise my energy expenditure up and above resting levels, okay? So this is where we're going to kind of lead into tomorrow to start talking about the physiology of muscle contractions, the physiology of energy expenditure, and how muscles need energy to contract. We have to get that energy by consuming oxygen a lot of times, and that means we have to increase the work of the cardiovascular system. We have to increase the work in the pulmonary system. We have to change where blood is going in the body. We have to change some things around. It changes our physiology, okay? So when you engage in physical activity, it increases energy expenditure. It makes those physiological systems have to change their function. It's that change in function that is going to help keep them healthy. Okay, and we will talk in a fair amount of depth about what kind of regular, normal resting function is and how exercise and activity alters those functions, and then how that function can contribute to better health as well as better fitness. Okay, so do you guys follow me on all of that? Okay, physical activity is just any movement that is going to lead to above resting levels of energy expenditure. So walking, tapping your foot, pretty much anything like that, that's physical activity. Exercise is a special case of physical activity where you are undertaking it in an effort to maintain or improve one of the dimensions of physical fitness, okay? So if we were still on campus, you guys might make the distinction that when you're walking from one class to the next, you're walking from the Huff out to your car, or you're walking across campus to go to physics class or something, that would be physical activity, right? But then if you come back to the Huff and you're going to go, I don't know, do the F45 class or something, that's exercise, okay? Or you're going to go to the CrossFit gym and you're going to do whatever today's WOD is, or you're going to go to Orange Theory and do their particular workout, or you're going to go for a run, whatever it might be, okay? Those things tend to be undertaken specifically to improve their fitness. Most exercise tends to occur at a higher energy expenditure level than a lot of kind of just basic physical activity where we're just walking around, if that makes any sense, okay? And so you guys will see as we get into how we make muscle stronger, how we improve cardiovascular function, how we make your endurance capacity go up, that there tends to be a correlation between how hard you make the muscles and the heart and your lungs and things work during a bout of exercise and the adaptations that are going to take place. The harder you make them work, okay, the more you overload them and tax them beyond what they're used to doing, then the more they're going to be able to adapt. And we'll talk a lot about that in the coming days and weeks, okay? All right, so we've talked about energy a little bit, talked about daily energy expenditure. How many calories do you burn in 30 minutes, okay? This is just kind of a fun thing that we got from the folks in the United Kingdom, right? And it's just talking about calories burned if you weighed 150 or 200 pounds. You can look at some fun things. How many calories can you burn in 30 minutes, right? So you go walk your dog, let's just say, and if you're a 200-pound person, you might be able to burn up to 200 calories. That all depends on what kind of a dog you have. If you have my dogs, you burn like 5 calories because they go this way and they smell something and they stop, and they run backwards and they smell something and they stop. You don't ever go very far, okay? But mowing is physical activity. You can see when you jog, you're going to burn even more. If you're going to play golf, even vacuuming and things around the house, it's going to be all of that. We always kind of laugh. You can tell your roommates they can improve their physical fitness if they clean your apartment, right? Dusting, vacuuming, doing the dishes, and those kinds of things. Maybe you guys can get around all of that. Watching TV, apparently, you're going to burn some calories watching TV. You're going to burn roughly the same amount by kissing for half an hour if you're going to be doing those kinds of things. So just kind of give you a rough guide of all of that. So for every activity that you do, and this is going to be your assignment for tomorrow, okay? What I want you guys to do is from the time that class is over until you log on for class tomorrow, I want you to make a list of every bit of physical activity that you think you get between the end of class today and the start of class tomorrow. And in addition to writing out what that is, I want you to write down how long you did it, okay? How long you did it. What I will share with you all, and you don't have to do anything with it, is so like my graduate student, when Jessica was doing her survey on how COVID and the quarantine has affected physical activity levels, is to understand how active you are, we need a way to equate different kinds of activities to each other to figure out who is getting the most energy expenditure. And so we need to know the amount of time that you spent doing something, and then we need to know what we call the intensity of that activity. And we quantify the intensity of physical activity by the extent to which it burns more calories above and beyond resting energy expenditure, okay? So if you take the same time frame, so you take this 30-minute time period and you run for 30 minutes, let's just say, okay, then you burn, based upon this, let's just say you burn 450 calories. That is going to equate to a certain amount of activity, okay? Golfing is a lower intensity than running because it burns fewer calories in that same 30 minutes. And so what we tend to do is we have this giant list, okay? And it groups different activities. Every activity you can possibly think of, it is listed on there. And you go through the list, and it will tell you roughly how many calories you burn per like minute or 10 minutes that you do that activity. And so when we do these questionnaires and we ask somebody, make a list of what you've done, fill it out, okay? And then we just go through and we assign a time and a caloric value to every one of those. We multiply and then we add them all up and we figure out how much activity have you gotten in a given day. And that way we can compare you all to each other, okay? So that's how we get this. We need time and we need intensity. So I want you guys to put down the time that's going to be on there, and then we'll talk a little more about intensity tomorrow. Okay. If you take nothing else away from this class, one, I will be very sad and I will feel like that I have failed as an instructor. But if you take nothing else from class, if you know this slide, I will feel like I've at least done the bare minimum, okay, in teaching you something. So the American Heart Association and the American College of Sports Medicine together have put together these recommendations for how much physical activity people are supposed to get every week, okay? These are based upon thousands and thousands and thousands of data points from thousands and thousands of people, that if you get this much activity, it will result in some level of reduction in your risk in cardiovascular disease, okay, and all-cause mortality. So to get health benefits, this is to say nothing of physical fitness whatsoever. This is just to have better health outcomes. You need 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity aerobic activity. Moderate intensity activity is something that we would equate to maybe brisk walking, okay? So you need to do somewhat brisk walking for about 22 minutes a day, okay? Or if you want to say 30 minutes, 5 days per week, however you want to break it down, okay? Go walk pretty fast for 20 to 25 minutes every day, and you will meet these guidelines and you will reap some level of health benefit from doing that, okay? Or if you do higher intensity physical activity, if you do vigorous intensity activity, you only need 75 minutes of it per week, okay? Because of the number of calories that you burn during moderate activity and the number of calories you burn during vigorous intensity activity, because you burn about twice as many in vigorous, you only have to go half as long, okay? So if you will go and jog like 12 minutes a day or 11 minutes a day, okay, you're going to reap some health benefits from doing that. Whether or not you ever run very fast or you ever even run very far, it's going to benefit you from a health standpoint, okay? This will visit you on the first test. It will visit you again on your final. It will be one of the only like 2 or 3 cumulative questions that we have. You will be asked about it again on the exit exam for when you finish and you graduate from our major, okay? So if you don't know anything else, please try to remember and know this. Shockingly, not very many Americans actually meet these guidelines, okay? Not very many Americans meet these guidelines. A lot of folks that are y'all's age meet them. Most people that are my age do not meet these guidelines, okay? And so this is one of the reasons that we have a lot of chronic disease, is because we do not get enough physical activity. We don't meet these recommendations. Now, the other piece of this that I did not mention initially, okay, is the aerobic portion of the guidelines are important, but they've also now added that you get added benefit if you can get 2 days of whole body resistance training. You need to lift weights as well, okay? And so what we find by adding some of the resistance training in is that the resistance training is really, really helpful for some of the diseases of older age, for improving people's balance, their ability to stand up and to walk, and to do kind of normal daily activities. Okay, the resistance training isn't that good, or any adding that much for, say, your heart or your lungs and how those things function, but they're really, really good for other normal daily activities. Okay, so even if you don't lift weights now, you should try to lift weights when you get older. I yell at my mother every time I talk to her that she needs to lift weights. One, because our child, her granddaughter, is this giant Amazon baby, and if she wants to be able to pick up Ellis, she needs to lift some weights. But two, it's really, really good for her. My mom has arthritis, and she has bad feet and some things, and she can't do a lot of walking. She does water lifts, but she needs to lift weights. Okay, so we'll talk later. Probably the end of this week about why, and I don't want to pick on you ladies, but the guys lift weights wrong in one way, and ladies, y'all tend to lift weights wrong in a slightly different way. I don't know that one is better or worse, but you guys will see that you need rep ranges of, say, 8 to 10. What we tend to find is that a lot of women don't lift enough weight. You lift light weights too many times, and you lift light weights under the misguided or sort of mistake that you think that's going to make your muscles look more defined, or that you will, if you lift heavy weights, you're going to look bulky or mannish or something like all of that. And most of the guys aren't going to look mannish from lifting the heavy weights. And so most of the ladies, y'all, for the most part, already there. But we'll talk about that, okay? But lifting weights really, really important. CrossFit is good as long as you don't hurt yourself. Power cleans and squats and all of those things, any kind of weights are really good and really beneficial. Okay, so let's talk about intermittent bouts. So if you need to get 30 minutes a day, you don't have to get that full 30 minutes all at one time. There's been research on get up in the morning and go walk for 10 minutes. On your lunch break, go walk for 10 minutes. And then in the evening, go walk for 10 minutes. And you get the same health benefits as if you did 30 minutes all at the same time. Okay. At one point, we thought this would be really, really helpful to encourage people to be more physically active. It's like, you got 10 minutes, right? Like Lindsay, you got 10 minutes, you can go do that now, you can go do 10 minutes later, right? You can get this and make this happen. And we tried that for a while to promote people to be more active, and they still didn't do anything. And so this is tending to fall out of favor a little bit. And now our big kind of hot button thing is to do really high intensity stuff, to do intervals and things like that, which is a lot of what CrossFit is. And so you don't have to go very long, but you got to go really, really hard. And you get some really good benefits, but that's kind of where we are. Okay, does intensity matter? The answer is absolutely yes. We're talking about how is intensity defined. Don't worry about this slide right now, guys. We're going to come back to this slide. We're going to come back to the idea of how we define intensity and how we can use age-predicted max heart rate and this idea of something called heart rate reserve to prescribe exercise intensity. So if you have an Apple Watch, or you have a Fitbit and it measures your heart rate, you can go walk or you can go run, and we can use the heart rate that records to kind of get an idea of how intense your exercise is. We're going to come back to this. We'll do that next week when we talk about aerobic exercise. Okay. I want to mention this thing here before we kind of finish up for the day. So and this has also begun to fall a little bit out of favor, but I think it's important to at least mention it to you guys, because this is the thing that underlies why you need 150 minutes of walking or 75 minutes of jogging. This is one of the things on how we're going to equate the energy expenditure together. Okay, and so it involves something called a MET, or an MET. And a MET stands for what we call a metabolic equivalent. Okay, so we can assign a so-called MET value, so a caloric expenditure value, to any activity that you do. Okay, and so what the MET is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to compare the caloric expenditure of the activity back to resting metabolic rate or resting metabolic expenditure, okay? So what we say is that sitting there, resting, doing nothing, that is one MET, one metabolic equivalent, okay? So then when you do an activity, or you do anything that requires some level of energy expenditure that is above resting rate, okay? If it requires double the amount of energy expenditure, that's 2 METs. If it requires 3 times the metabolic expenditure, that's 3 METs, okay? And so on and so forth. And so we're going to move our way up, right? Resting metabolic rate in most people, okay, if we were to come to my lab and measure it, what we are actually measuring is the amount of oxygen that you are requiring, okay, to make the ATP needed to kind of run normal resting functions. I'm going to give you some units on this, and we're going to look at something called oxygen uptake or VO2 here. And resting metabolic rate in most people has a VO2 value, so an oxygen use value of about 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute, okay? This number is not going to mean anything to you guys today, okay? By Tuesday of next week, we will talk in a lot more detail about what this means, where it comes from, okay? But as of now, I just want you to know and appreciate that this is the number, okay? And because it is relative to kilograms of body weight, it tends to be pretty stable and pretty similar across all people, okay? So 1 MET has a VO2 value of about 3.5 mLs per kg per minute. So 2 METs is going to require 7 mLs of oxygen per kilogram per minute. 3 METs is going to require, 13.5, and so on and so forth, and we can move our way up. And from that, we can estimate energy expenditure. If we wanted to, we could assign a number of kcals that are burned per minute per some milliliter of oxygen. So walking tends to lead to energy expenditure that is somewhere between 3 and 6 times resting values, okay? So anything that is going to fall in that range, 3 to 6 METs, is considered moderate intensity activity. If it's under 3 METs, it's considered light intensity activity. So if you guys are sitting there riding or tapping your foot, that's light intensity activity. And then fast walking or walking uphill, jogging or running or rowing or something like that tends to be vigorous intensity activity because it is going to have an energy expenditure that is greater than 6 metabolic equivalents, okay? And so if you take a MET value and you multiply it by the amount of time that you do that activity, then that gives you something called a MET minute of activity. And that is how we arrive at what you need to get from an activity standpoint in a given week. You need to be in this 500 to 1,000 MET minutes per week range. And to get to that, you need 150 minutes, let's just say at 6 METs, or you need 75 minutes at, say, 8 METs or something. You're going to get a roughly similar amount of activity, okay? That's where this idea has come from. That's why the numbers are what they are, okay? On the test, I will ask you a few questions about kind of what are the ranges for these things. You're going to have this slide available to you. You can go back, you can look it up again, and kind of figure out where different activities are going to fall. Okay? Everybody with me still? We doing okay? Yes? Can I get some thumbs up or something out of everybody? Like I need some snaps or something. Okay? Okay, good. I'm getting a few. Very good. All right. So the next thing we're going to try to go through, exercises, medicine. Yes, yes. I told you guys, most Americans don't meet the activity guidelines. About 70% of adults do not meet the 150 minutes or 75 minutes per week of physical activity. Okay. About 30% of adults get 0 leisure time physical activity. Think about people, maybe if you're back at home, if you're not, if you have roommates that are around, think about when you're not in class or you're not working, okay? Think about how often maybe you go out and go for a walk or a run or go ride your bike or do something that would be considered physical activity, okay? 30% of people get no leisure time physical activity. Under normal circumstances, or like in a COVID world, what that means is I get up, I go and I sit on my couch and I log onto my computer and I work remotely. At some point I get up and have a snack. At some point I have lunch maybe, right? I go and I sit back down at 5 o'clock or whenever it needs to be. I log back off, I turn on the TV and I sit there, and then I go to bed, right? And I get no leisure time physical activity. That is very, very, very common. About 30% of adults get none, okay? So what that means is that we are sedentary. Okay, if you fail to meet these guidelines, you are what we call quote unquote sedentary. And so the combination of a lack of activity in concert with being overweight or obese is what drives a lot of our risk of these chronic diseases. We have low fitness and low activity because of that, and it's going to drive these chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease and like cancer and diabetes especially. Okay. So here we have a graph from the CDC on the county by county level of estimates of the percentage of the population in that county that are physically inactive. And so what I want you to look at, the darker the blue, okay, the darker the blue, the less active people are. Okay, that means we've got greater than about 33% or greater than about a third of the population in that county are going to be inactive. So look here in Oklahoma, okay? You guys want to guess what county that is and what county that is? This county that I have my little thing on, like the place in Oklahoma that has the lightest color. You guys want to guess what county that is?
Cleveland.
Cleveland, because of you all, okay? Because of you guys. And so we get out into the more rural areas. You might think in the rural areas it would be higher, but we would have higher activity because of maybe farming jobs or folks working in the oil fields and things. But as it turns out, that actually is not going to be the case. Okay. But I want you to look at this, where we have this kind of belt through Appalachia and the southeast. Okay. Here, and then weirdly kind of running up into, I don't know, kind of the upper Midwest and out kind of into Montana. We're going to have places that are not going to be active. Where are people the most active? Colorado, New Mexico, okay, Washington, California, and those kinds of places. So places that have high levels of inactivity, okay, also tend, oh, I don't have it in here. Whoops. All right, I had a whole little spiel done. You can also get county by county level estimates of all-cause mortality, of cardiovascular disease, of diabetes, of obesity, you name it. They all tend to track with the levels of inactivity. Look at the places that have the highest all-cause mortality rates. They're going to be the places that have the least amount of activity. Look at the counties that have the highest rates of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. They tend to be the ones that have the highest rates of inactivity. Okay, so again, what I want to illustrate from this is that many of you are from Oklahoma. Okay, Oklahoma is, tends to be in the bottom, say 10 or 12 from a state standpoint on the number of people that are going to meet physical activity guidelines. We're not great at being active, and therefore we have these high rates of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And so what we need as a state is more bike trails. We need to be able to walk around and get around and not have to commute from Edmond into Midtown every day, okay? And we need, kind of ways to be able to get people to be more active and do all of that. Okay, So we've looked at these kinds of things. The last part of this, and we'll stop for the day, what I want to tell you guys is if we look, okay, exercise and physical activity is considered to be a modifiable or a modifiable lifestyle risk factor for heart disease or all-cause mortality, okay? You hear lots of things about don't smoke. You hear lots of things about eat healthier, don't eat high-fat foods, okay? Eat more fruits, eat more vegetables, don't eat so much. You hear much, much less about, hey, go be active, okay? If we look at all of these kinds of things, okay, especially in the United States, behind tobacco use, okay, being physically inactive is the second leading modifiable cause of death in the US. We have all of this stuff, all of this money that's being poured into it, all of these things with advertising about don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke. If you smoke, it's going to kill you, right? There's not nearly the outcry about go for a walk, go for a walk, go for a walk, go run, get outside, go play, do something. And yet it's almost as bad for us, okay, to be physically inactive, okay? Being physically inactive is worse for your health than having unsafe sex. It's worse for your health than being born underweight, okay? It's worse for your health than having high levels of LDL cholesterol, okay? It's really, really bad for us. And yet we don't spend much time publicizing this, and therefore we don't spend a lot of time doing things. We have taken PE and recess out of elementary schools, okay? It's not good, right? So we will continue talking about some of this stuff a little bit more tomorrow, and then we'll start getting into some of the anatomy and physiology of the neuromuscular system, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going